Greetings and salutations and welcome back to Colin's Last Stand right here on YouTube. My name is Colin Moriarty. And if I'm looking haggard, it's because I am. I'm moving, as you guys already know. The shelves are emptying, the boxes are all over the goddamn place. The apartment's in complete disarray. But there's good news. This is the last of these kinds of videos you will receive in terms of the low production value. Next week, you'll get 2 videos, one on science, one on history, that are of the more produced variety. Think of like the Third Amendment video or the 2-part Cal Exit video. And then the week after that, hopefully I'll get into the swing of things where I'll have a nice little setup in my new apartment in I was going to say San Diego. That's not true. I'm not moving to Santa Monica, where I can just turn the camera on, put some lights on, and have something a little more predictable. We're getting there. I appreciate your patience. As for the lighting and the noise in the background, I don't know. I don't know if you can hear the cars going by. The light, not as good as it usually is, the natural light, because it's raining here in San Francisco. Go figure. So today I wanted to do a quick video for you guys on this idea of cultural appropriation. And the reason I'm doing this video is because I see articles floating around all the time about how culture is being appropriated and blah, 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 blah. I'm tired of hearing it. I think it's stupid. And I actually think cultural appropriation in its purest form is not only good, but essential. And I'm going to get into that in a minute. But before I do that, I'm going to give you a definition. I'm looking here at my computer on cultural appropriation. I typed in cultural appropriation definition into Google, and it brought up Wikipedia. So here's what it says. Cultural appropriation is the adoption or use of the elements of one culture by members of another culture. It goes on to say, cultural appropriation is sometimes portrayed as harmful, framed as cultural misappropriation, and claimed to be a violation of the intellectual property rights of the originating culture. I'm not sure that cultures have intellectual property rights, but I digress. So the big thing here is that I feel like intention is what's most important here, what your intent is when you're quote-unquote culturally appropriating from another culture. But I think it goes way deeper than that. It goes towards this idea that everything is in a vacuum, that we've never learned or taken from each other in the past over the many thousands of years prior to this date, this time right now. And how that appropriation and that acquisition of ideas and culture and language and written forms and art and all these kinds of things has gotten us to this point. And I think the thing that's really lost the most, and I know this is going to be surprising to some people, although probably not people that have open minds and understand what's going on, is that the more we appropriate and take from cultures around us, the better off we are. I mean, who can possibly deny that? Look at the Earth in the last, say, 500 years, since the age of exploration really began. And look at the Earth and human society the previous 10,000 years. Say, from the beginning of the age of exploration, right on back to when agriculture really was created as we kind of know it now, and animal husbandry and all the things that allow societies to remain stagnant and sedentary and not have to move around and not be nomadic and allow themselves, therefore, to create real societies as opposed to bands of people that are just trying to survive. Think about that time, then think about the time in which we really all started to collide with each other, and think about all the positive things that have come of that. Now, I'm not saying only positive things have come from that. Of course, that's not true. The collision of societies and cultures brought around African slavery, for instance, which is a terrible thing, and the triangle trade, which is a terrible thing, and diseases wrought upon people that were not prepared for them, and people getting land taken away from them. Although I do debate the latter in a way. Everywhere in the world, people are living on land that was once occupied by other people. But of course, this is only something that's specifically directed at the United States, as if somehow we're the only ones responsible for displacing native peoples. The Spanish certainly didn't wipe out the Aztec Empire and anything like. So I want to get into intent, but I also want to get into why I think that we would be a really boring and sterile society if we didn't start borrowing and taking from each other. And in fact, it's really just a hypothetical, but because without us doing all of that, we simply wouldn't be here today. There simply would be none of this. And I'm not talking about this behind me, because there's just a shelf, some books, and on a Gadsden flag, but I'm talking about everything in the world around us wouldn't exist. We would not be here without having borrowed from each other. Borrowing and taking liberally, I might add. Now, one of the interesting things that I really think is worth noting in this argument is that population growth has a lot to do with this. And I was looking into this recently because I was reading a little bit about early man and about, early modern man, as it were. So several 100,000 years ago. And when you read about this, there's theories that there might have been really only like a few tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people on the earth, say 200, 250,000 years ago. But by the time you get to like 10,000 BCE, before Common Era, so you're talking about 12,000 years ago, the population of the Earth might have been between like 2.5 and 5 million people. Now that seems like a lot, I guess, but it's not. I mean, there are more people at the lower end than New York City right now than there are on the entire Earth only 12,000 years ago. And then by 2,000 years ago, that number increases to something like maybe 50 or 100 million people. So the numbers are getting up there. And then when Jesus was on the Earth, you had something like maybe 300 million people, and then that number actually stayed pretty static for about 1,000 years, but then the population started to grow. And by 1800, we reached the billion people mark. By 1900, we were close to 2 billion. By 2000, we were at 6 billion. By 2050, we'll be at 9 billion. By 2100, we'll be at 11 billion. And the reason I'm telling you this is because Earth is a big place with lots of land. Most of it's water, but there's lots of land to exist on. And when there aren't a lot of populations to interact with, and when people aren't interacting with each other, which was the case 5 or 10,000 years ago, and certainly longer ago than that, well, there wasn't a lot of cultural diffusion. There wasn't a lot of people learning or taking things and ideas from each other, or at least it wasn't happening at a great clip. That's why if you read about early modern humans, and you read about Cro-Magnon, and you even read about Neanderthal and some species that didn't quite make it, but probably found ourselves in our genetic makeup nonetheless, you realize that their technological and even artistic and maybe lingual breakthroughs happened over a very long period of time because they were stagnant. But when people started to run into each other and started to learn from each other, well, that was a different story entirely. The rise of animal husbandry and agriculture is actually really important because that was one of the most influential things that happened in specific areas of the planet that actually probably happened separately in certain areas. For instance, it probably happened separately, say, in the Americas as opposed to Mesopotamia, as opposed to maybe East Asia. But those things still happened and influenced people around them. So they realized, well, wow, we can actually remain stagnant. We can build a society. We can have a little village. We don't have to be crazy. We can save food for the next year and the year after that. That will let us develop our culture. We can start to tell stories and develop our language and paint and create art and artifacts. Create better tools to hunt and tools of war. And do all these kinds of things that allowed society to progress very quickly. So if you think about 200,000 years leading up to 10,000 BCE, and then you think about the 12,000 years since, well, that's an exponential growth in terms of technology, in terms of population, and all those kinds of things. And if you really think specifically about the age of exploration, all the way to today, or simply from the Industrial Revolution to today, populations get bigger, people are closer together, we start learning from each other, we start taking from each other liberally, and we start developing this modern world that we live in. And I think that's fantastic. Now, let's bring it all the way back, if we will, to intent. Because I think this is lost when you see the articles about, oh, the girls at Coachella are wearing Indian headdresses and fucking jewelry on their face. Like, who cares? They're not doing it to insult you. They're not doing it to insult any other culture. In fact, I would say it's a celebration of culture. These people aren't fucking minstrels. They're not wearing blackface. The jewelry on these girls' faces are beautiful. The Indian headdresses are awesome. You know, it's so weird that this rise in cultural appropriation, blah, 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 happens at the time with the millennials and even Generation X and the generation that's coming up now, the most forward-thinking, culturally accepting, non-bigoted, non-sexist, non-racist generations of all time. These people aren't even worth being a target because they're not necessarily doing anything to hurt anyone else. In fact, I don't think any of those people that were dressing in Indian head garb, taking ecstasy at Coachella, really gave a shit. Other than that, they thought it looked cool, and that's good enough for me. You know what sounds cool? Rock and roll music, which was created by black musicians in the jazz and blues genres that we all listen to today. But are we culturally appropriating that, or has rock just evolved from blues and from jazz, and also from country and from folk music, and then made itself into something today based on all sorts of interesting elements from all over the world? But without African Americans, there would be no rock music. See, this goes back to the point I was making earlier about the evolution of society, and how the evolution of society actually acts a lot like the evolution of us as people. The things that work stick, the things that don't work are put out eventually. When societies weren't mixing together and weren't meeting each other very much, or where there's no way to communicate, or there was no way to culturally interact, well, those things remain stagnant. So if jazz, for instance, was created by a small band of Africans somewhere that didn't have interactions with anyone else, then it would have just remained probably jazz. But because jazz was then taken here, and blues was taken here, and country and folk, and it was all mixed up, and then people did a bunch of interesting things with it, well, we got to where we are today. You know, at some point, Cro-Magnons and Neanderthals met each other in Europe, were probably using different tools, wearing different garb, had different hunting techniques. Remember, these guys hunted big game species. These guys hunted in coordination, were very smart. I'd be shocked if no one was teaching anyone anything. And in fact, it seems like Cro-Magnon clearly had the better techniques. And since we're talking about Native Americans, we should really talk about them more distinctly, because the Native population in the United States has certainly been mistreated. There is a long tradition in American politics at the American government level of mistreating Native Americans, of pushing them off their land, and the Trail of Tears and all the Indian Wars in the 19th century and the post-Civil War era, and it's all terrible. I mean, I'm not condoning it, but it also seems like a lot of white liberals are speaking on behalf of Native Americans and telling them they feel ways that they don't. And a good example of this is the Washington Redskins, the NFL team, the NFL franchise, which, according to white people, is extremely offensive to everyone. And I personally have no real horse in this game, as it were. Is it a game? You put a horse in the game? You put a horse in the race. I have no horse in this race. I don't really care about the name. I can see why it would be offensive maybe, but I'm not going to die on the cross here. But then last year, a poll that was even shocking to me came out that at least gave me pause and made me think about it. Native Americans, or American Indians were polled, asked, do you find the Washington Redskins name offensive? I opened it being like, I would assume so. This is all I hear about how offensive this is. It's so fucking offensive. No, 9 out of 10 American Indians polled did not find the name Washington Redskins offensive. It's interesting, because maybe they realize that you don't name a sports franchise necessarily after something that you're trying to decry or make fun of. You're actually naming a sports franchise traditionally after something you celebrate, or something that you think is badass, or something that you think is scary, or something that you think is dominant. And if there's one thing that I think a lot of Americans can agree, and a lot of the worldwide population can agree, is that there's something really special and sacred and interesting and dominant, a little mysterious, and all of these things about the American Indian population. That's why we have the Kansas City Chiefs, the Fighting Sioux, the Cleveland Indians. Although that old logo, that old Cleveland Indians logo, yeah, I can see how that might be offensive. But generally speaking, it's all mixed up here, because I don't understand what's offensive to the actual people that are supposed to be offended, what's offensive in quotes to the people that think they should be offended on behalf of other people, and then of course the biggest group of them all, which is the group of us, I think, which is we're just kind of here being like, well, we're not really trying to offend anyone, and we don't mean anything by anything we're doing, and the intent is what really matters. And of course, I think rock music that I brought up earlier is a really great example of how something persists today based on an amalgamation of all of these elements from all of these cultures. I mean, just ask the Beatles, one of the great rock bands of all time, who their biggest inspirations were. And amongst them will certainly be Ravi Shankar, the Indian musician, and Chuck Berry, the African-American guitarist. And of course, the jazz and the blues and the country and the folk, all this kind of stuff happened in the United States with an interesting mixture of elements that we gave to the rest of the world. And I would say rock music is, beyond the shadow of the doubt, the biggest musical genre that ever was. And of course, you have to give a special shout out generally to the African-American community, the Black American community, which has been such an inspirational force in global culture over especially the last 100 years. Not only with rock music, but with fashion and with language and with other genres of music, including my beloved hip-hop. I'm a white man from a middle-class place on Long Island that might not be able to relate to the experiences a lot of these black rap musicians, for instance, rap about or talk about or live for and live to tell the story of. But that doesn't make me being a fan of theirs appropriating their culture. In fact, I really respect and appreciate it. And I think if you went around and asked everyone at Coachella who was wearing jewelry on their face or wearing the headdresses, or the people that are just listening to rap music but might not be able to relate to it or whatever it is, they're not appropriating anything. They're simply acting as humans have acted over many thousands of years. They're evolving with the culture that is itself evolving. And you can't have it both ways. And that's the major thing that I'm troubled with and that I don't really understand. You want this egalitarian society at all costs, and I want it too. I think that that's really important. Judged on your character and your merit, and not your skin color, not your creed or your religion. Although I want that too. But it seems like this constant crying of cultural appropriation tells a different story. It's similar to the anti-fascists that run around college campuses acting like fascist brown shirts. You can say one thing, but indeed, your actions always speak louder than words. And when you say to a person, well, you're culturally appropriating this, or you can't do this, or you can't do that, it's like, well, isn't it 2017, and aren't we kind of fusing together more and more as a globalized society, taking influences from every which angle and everywhere on the globe. I think that's totally great. I think that's totally fascinating. I'm wearing my slightly offensive France losers of both World Wars I and II shirt. But it's really just a joke. My friend Abby bought this for me in college over 10 years ago. And some people take offense to it, but it's supposed to be ironic and interesting and stupid and silly and a conversation starter. Because indeed, America's relationship with France goes way back to the 1770s. We wouldn't exist without France. And likewise, well, there would have been no French Revolution without the influence of the American Revolution and the American thinkers, and so on and so forth. See how we influence each other over time? Isn't that something? You know, I was reading about, as one does, I was reading about the Easter Islanders recently, and how they had sweet potatoes, but there was no way for the sweet potato to have gotten there. Then they realized that the word for sweet potato is the same word that Andean Indians were using for the sweet potato that was also found in places like Hawaii and other islands in Polynesia. And they realized that it's likely that either some of these Polynesians found their way to South America at some point and then went back to these islands, or that South American travelers found their way to these islands and then back, and so on and so forth. So this idea of cultural appropriation or influencing other cultures around you, this goes way back, and it goes in even subtle ways. I mean, the sweet potato, for instance. This fucking sweet potato. God, speaking of potatoes, we associate potatoes with Ireland, but the potato comes from South America. It comes from Peru and Bolivia, or current-day Peru and Bolivia, but has totally influenced the course, for better or for worse, of the Irish population, and the potato is associated with Ireland. Now, it's not associated with where it actually came from. You can say the same thing about the tomato, which also comes from Central and South America, but which is intimately associated today with Italian cuisine. The other part of Italian cuisine is pasta, which comes from really Greek influences and influences before even Jesus walked the earth, before Italy was ever a thing, before Italians were ever a thing, all of this. But over time, it became Italian. No, Marco Polo didn't bring pasta back from China, although that's a much more interesting story. Not actually true. Shit, the Chinese changed the course of warfare with gunpowder, which they invented over 1,000 years ago. And they invented the hand cannon, which was a primitive gun. And the Mongol invaders and the Silk Road traders and all this slowly brought this information, this new technology to Central Asia, and then Eastern Europe, and Central Europe, and Western Europe, and so on and so forth. And lo and behold, you had muskets. Shit, Egyptian hieroglyphics, one of the earliest and most prolific forms of written communication, wouldn't have been without the inspiration of Sumerian culture on the Egyptians. Written culture didn't begin in Egypt, obviously, but written culture in Egypt was directly influenced by what was going on elsewhere. And without that written language, perhaps we wouldn't have gotten these amazing, prolific Egyptian monuments and pyramids and this culture that we look back on fondly. That Egyptian culture was directly influenced by its contemporaries. And my favorite example, a contemporary example, of course, is the internet. I mean, the Department of Defense in the United States created what we know as the internet today, but it was CERN in Europe that created the World Wide Web as a shell on top of the internet to use it in more practical, non-governmental, non-military ways. They took an existing tool, made their own thing, and spread it around the world. And here we are. You're watching a video on fucking YouTube now, thanks to that. So I guess what I'm saying is, we have to have some look at the intention of what's going on around us, guys. When you celebrate St. Patrick's Day, but you're not Irish, I don't get offended that I'm half Irish, half Italian. I don't get offended by that. I think that's great. And by the way, it could be offensive too. People associate St. Patrick's Day with heavy drinking, which is something associated with Ireland, which is something that is offensive, yet it's just the way it is. And I don't think anyone is wearing green and wearing a shamrock to be offensive. I live in a very Chinese neighborhood in San Francisco. I see lots of non-Chinese people celebrating Chinese New Year out on the streets every year. I also live in one of the gay capitals of the world, and gay pride is a big thing in San Francisco, and I see plenty of people supporting gay rights, marching for gay rights, including me. I was a huge proponent of fighting Proposition 8, for instance, back in 2008. I'm not gay. I'm not trying to appropriate any culture. I'm trying to reinforce someone else's culture and tell them that that culture is accepted and merge it into our existing culture. I don't know. It's just something to think about, because I'm tired of seeing all these articles decrying this idea of cultural appropriation, and everything's offensive, and you can't wear cornrows in your hair, and there can't be commercials for shea butter with white people in it, and there can't be blah, 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 blah. And we're all just tired of it. At least I am, and I wanted to make this video for you guys too, because I sense you guys are tired of it too. This is the way society works. This is the way society gets better and bigger and smarter. Just ask the European scientists during the Age of Enlightenment whose ideas came from Middle Eastern and Arabic astronomers and physicists. It's ridiculous. This is the way the world works, my friends. And so next time someone tells you it's cultural appropriation because of this, or it's cultural appropriation because of that, I simply say cultural appropriation has gotten us a very long way indeed, hasn't it? Well, I thank you so much for being here with me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please remember that this is fully fan-supported and independent, so I could really use your support at patreon.com/ColinsLastStand at the $1, $5, $10, whatever level a month you can support me. It really means a lot. I don't want to monetize videos. There are no baked-in ads or anything like that here, as you can see, so please consider supporting me there if you'd like. Share the videos. Be good to each other in the comments. Enjoy the rest of your day, of course. And thank you for being here with me. I'll see you next time for Colin's Last Stand. Be good.